Some of you I just saw a few hours ago. I'm going to call to order the March 20th meeting of Community Planning and Economic Development. Like to acknowledge the committee members that we have, Councilmember Cortez and Deputy Mayor Ben Winograd. We also have Councilmember Poland, Fay, Mayor Cantor, and Councilmember Barry Walters. So I'd like to welcome everyone here this morning. And the first item of business is the approval of the minutes for January 17th, 2024 and February 26th, 2024. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Okay, I will second that, and the minutes are approved. Now I will turn the meeting over to our town manager, Mr. Rick Ledwith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. I appreciate everyone's time this morning after spending quite a bit of time together last night. Just want to take a quick moment and introduce our team around the table. We have our Director of Community Development, Dwayne Martin, our Finance Director, Peter Privatera. We have Lisa Newton and Patty Lewis. They're in the conference room down on the second floor. The masters and architects of this large document we're going to go through. And now also wanted to just before turning it over to Dwayne, take a moment to thank the council for your support over the last year, particularly as it relates to our community development department. As we have been discussing, not just over the last year, but over the last 2 years, we've seen a significant amount of building development, building projects and economic development throughout the town. In addition, this year we added a focus on safe streets for all users. And this building development and focus on safety has had a direct impact on our community development department, both within the building department as well as engineering. And the mayor highlighted both of these impacts during her State of the Town address on Monday night. And through this council's commitment, we have lowered our wait times for building permits from literally weeks to less than a week. And in addition, we've talked quite a bit about Vision Zero and this council's commitment to 0 deaths and 0 injuries, serious injuries within the next 10 as a result of car crashes within 10 years. We, in that Vision Zero commitment, we have added an additional engineer who will help us facilitate Vision Zero, particularly as we come out of the gate this year. As we talked about, we've identified over 70 projects that we are committed to completing during the first year of Vision Zero. And thanks to the council's commitment to that, we have the staff to assist us with that. And we are receiving, as we talked about, a Safe Streets for All grant. We have not received the funding quite yet, but we're going to be utilizing some of those funds to offset some of those expenses. So just wanted to quickly thank all of you for that. And at this point, I will, through you, Madam Chair, turn it over to our Director, Dwayne Martin, who will provide a summary of the community development budget. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Dwayne Martin, Director of Community Development. Rick, thank you as well. You always do such a great job teeing these up. So you covered some of the things I was going to go into, which is fine. So I'm going to start with the operating budget. So for community development, the operating budget starts on page 10-1 of the budget booklet. And to start off, I just wanted to mention that community development is made up of 4 separate divisions, which are management, engineering, building inspection, and planning and zoning. And I'm going to walk through the budget component for community development. Feel free to stop me at any time, but I will pause frequently to give you that opportunity. So I want to start off with our fiscal year 24 highlights, just to point out some of the accomplishments that the department has been able to achieve. For the management and engineering division, staff contributed to the town's Vision Zero program, as Rick mentioned. And that was from the very beginning to the very end. There was quite a bit of involvement working with the consultant and the task force, which was made up of many. It involved a lot of coordination, a lot of meetings to get to the successful end, and we're excited to now start implementing it. The management division did obtain, as Rick mentioned, a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant for speed management, and we're excited to get that launched later on this year. The building inspection division, we were able to implement a lot of operational changes, and we are seeing the benefit of that. For a long time, we would get many, many complaints about delays, and we're not hearing that much, if at all, anymore, which is fantastic. We did add staff thanks to the town council. That was a big help. We also launched online permitting using our CityView platform, which by itself seems like it would be a benefit, but it was actually a huge benefit both to the staff, to the public, to the contractors getting permits. We no longer are moving paper around the office. We were drowning, if you will, in paper, and we're starting to get rid of that. So a lot less handling of paper, which is great. Planning division, also, as Rick mentioned, we've been handling a lot of development activity, a lot of it centered around residential, and we had over 240 units that were passed through the planning division. They made a huge effort to address those. And then the engineering division completed the design and construction of 2 sections of our Troutbrook Trail, which is fantastic, stretching from Asylum Avenue down to Fern Street. So those are just some of the highlights that were accomplished in the past year. Looking forward to the next fiscal year for goals and objectives, just wanted to highlight a few of those. We are going to implement the West Hartford Center Infrastructure Master Plan, starting off with 2 reconstructions in the center on LaSalle Road, Farmington Avenue, and then also on Park Road. So that master plan is going to be immediately put into effect and used, and we're going to continue to coordinate on the center projects, as you'll hear in the very near future. In addition, as I mentioned, we're going to start working on the year 1 actions from our Vision Zero plan. It's a lot of work to accomplish, but we are getting prepared to start implementing many of those. And then we have another section of the Troutbrook Trail that we're going to complete this year. That section is from Park Road down to Jackson Avenue. Once we complete that, which will be later on this year, we will have completed what was originally planned for the Troutbrook Trail, which stretches 3.8 miles right through the center of town. So it's a beautiful amenity for a lot of the residents to enjoy. We'll look to see if we can expand it or connect to it in other areas, but that was the originally planned Troutbrook Trail section. Okay, moving on. So now I'm turning to page 10-4 in the budget book. Starting off with the management division. The management division is made up of 2 full-time employees, myself and an office operations specialist, a small but mighty group. And there really isn't anything to focus on with respect to the budget for the management division. There were no significant changes, but I'll pause there in case there are any questions. Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to the engineering division, which is on page 10-6. The engineering division is made up of 10 full-time employees. We did add 1 new full-time employee. That employee has started this week. That's a civil engineer 2, focused primarily on our Vision Zero initiative. And similar to the management division, there are no significant budget impacts or changes proposed in the engineering division, but I will pause in case there are questions.
I'd just like to acknowledge that Councilor Blanks has joined us, and also our Corporation Counsel, Dallas Dodge.
Okay, seeing no questions, I'm going to advance to page 10-9 of the budget booklet. This is the building inspection division. Building inspection division is made up of 10 full-time employees and 2 part-time employees. The 2 part-time employees are staff assistants. We did add 1 full-time building inspector in fiscal year 24. Couple things to mention with regards to their operating budget line items, specifically uniforms and laundry and telecommunications. So not huge increases requested, but there were increases nonetheless requested. If you look at the percentages, they look through the roof, but in actuality, the dollar amount is not that big, but it is a little bit more than we would typically ask. So I wanted to bring those to the table and just mention the reason for those. Again, it's uniforms and laundry. So it's shirts, jackets, and shoes for the field staff. The inspectors do go onto private property almost daily. So it's important to identify them to the public as well as for their own safety. They also get safety shoes, steel toes, et cetera, because they are on construction sites. And then there was additional requests for telecommunications, primarily because of the new staff as it relates to cell phones and desk phones. There were 2 full-time staff hired and 1 addition added in the building inspection division related to a retirement. So even though the numbers don't necessarily reflect that, there were new staff in the division. I'll pause there to see if there are any questions. Okay. So now I'm moving to the planning and zoning division, which is on page 10-12 of the budget document. Planning and zoning division is funded or budgeted for 6 full-time employees. However, we've been struggling to some extent in the planning and zoning division to get to 6, but the goal is to get to 6 this calendar year. The challenges that we've had is we did have a staff person depart. We had a backfilling of a staff position that was vacated through retirement a few years back. We've been bringing on new staff. Some of the staff has been shuffling. We offer a position that's available for the reasons I mentioned, and a current staff person will get that job, whether it's a lateral move or a promotion for them. So good for the organization to see the staff grow within, but then it requires us to then do another recruitment. So currently have 5 employees in planning and zoning, and we are advertising to get the 6th, which would be great given all of the workload that they encounter. So a couple things to point out with regards to planning and zoning. If you look at the expenditure section of their budget, there was a slight change this year. So you'll notice for professional services for past years, there wasn't anything there. And then all of a sudden there's a $10,000 request in fiscal year 25. Again, the percentage is really high. It is $10,000. And then below it, the contractual service line was fairly steady. And then there was a spike. And now this year it's requested at 5,000. So it's 26,000. Why are you only asking for 5? So the contractual services traditionally was to bring on a professional consultant to help with some of the development reviews, and then also for transcription services. Because we're recording a lot of the meetings, the transcription services are not often needed, and the consulting services should really be in the professional services line item of the budget. It's more applicable there based on how the budget document is written in other sections. So having said all that, the reason for the additional 10,000 professional services is to help staff with the development permit review specifically related to wetlands. So that was shifted from the contractual services line item of their budget and put into professional services. A little bit more background on specifically what that has been and may be used for again in the very near future is the former Yukon campus. Quite a bit of development activity, especially related to wetlands. We do have staff capable of handling that, but in combination with all the other development aspects related to that particular site, we wanted to bring a consultant on to help. So we used that in FY24, hence the spike in that line item for contractual services, but we think it's more appropriate to shift. So that explains the change there. One other thing to point out is the telecommunication line item for planning and zoning. You'll see that that's a considerable increase. Don't focus on the percentage, focus on the dollar amount. But it was needed for the new staff that I mentioned that we have on board that joined us recently, but also the new staff person that we're looking to bring on this calendar year. So that is why that is requested. I'll pause there to see if you have any questions regarding planning and zoning.
Do any committee members have any questions on the planning and zoning division? Any other council members have any questions? Okay, I had a couple things start and you went over all those, so that I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Any questions on the operating budget before I go to the capital improvement program? Okay. Get situated. Bear with me 1 second. So we're going to go to page 3-1 of the capital improvement program. And the focus on that page is it's a large table. So we're going to be looking at the transportation and circulation capital improvement programs on that page, and then we can go through the individual pages as needed. But what I wanted to do is walk through each of those because there are some changes to those programs. A lot of them are reoccurring, so I don't plan on going through the entire CIP. But just bear with me. I'll pause, like I said before, frequently if you have questions. So we'll start off on page 3-2 with pedestrian and bicycle management. This is a recurring CIP. We predominantly use this program for our vast public sidewalk network. And what I mean by that is the sidewalks that are along public streets, not on town properties, but along public streets, for which we have about 300 miles. We do use it for bicycling facilities as well, but a lot of what we've been doing through the recent years is related to road work. So that funding is paid, or the projects are paid for using other CIP funding. As we go through time, we'll be using more of this CIP for bicycle facilities to maintain them. There are no requested changes in fiscal year 25 for the pedestrian and bicycle management CIP. The next one is on page 3-3, which is stormwater management. This is also a recurring CIP. This, however, is different from flood mitigation, which we'll get to soon. This program is used predominantly for the maintenance of our existing system, but we do look to improve it as needed. So the vast majority of this is related to bridges, culverts, manholes, catch basins, and storm pipes. Essentially our existing system. We will do inspections and make replacements and improvements if we can. A lot of it's related to our road repaving, but sometimes we get issues with sinkholes or problems with the system. We'll use the CIP for that. There are no requested changes to this capital improvement program. Turning the page, the next one is on 3-4. This is our street reconstruction program. Street reconstruction program, if you continue to look through the capital improvement program, it is going to change. We are doing a lot of neighborhood street reconstructions like we have for approximately 30 years. That program is nearing an end. So you'll see the requested amount of funding for street reconstruction will start to drop down. Still pretty elevated for fiscal year 25. Street reconstruction, you're probably all familiar, but you'll see it oftentimes we're installing granite curbing, of course repaving the road, but we're also doing sidewalk work, drainage improvements. This also involves excavating below the pavement. So it's not just a simple mill and pave. Oftentimes the roads need more significant improvement as far as what's below the pavement. So that's included. We'll do concrete driveway aprons and some other infrastructure improvements if it makes sense. So for fiscal year 25, in this order are the planned roadway reconstructions. These are for neighborhood streets. So St. Augustine Street is planned to go first. Highland Street would be next. Warwick Street, and then Pleasant Street. Yes, I know St. Augustine Street has been coveted for quite some time. The utility work, I'm told, is out of the way. So here we go. So that's what's planned for street reconstruction. We did ask for a request of $550,000 for fiscal year 25. And that's primarily due to the escalating construction material cost and labor costs. So in order to be able to afford those streets based on construction unit prices from our contracts, that was the request for $550,000. Okay, the next one is on page 3-5, which is street resurfacing. So this is where we go to a lot of streets throughout town and do milling and paving. Typically, the work doesn't involve curbing that we need to install below the grade. It's usually curbing that goes right on top of the asphalt. Oftentimes, we're not doing as much sidewalk or drainage work, not a lot of work below the pavement. So it's usually a much quicker project. It does include the driveway aprons usually as well. Similar to street reconstruction, the same reason we asked for an increase in this capital improvement program of $200,000. Again, it's the escalating costs of material and labor to accomplish these projects. We try to do about 7 miles of resurfacing a year. Sometimes we'll get 8. And then the reconstructions, we're trying to do 1.5 miles to 2 miles. The goal is to get to 10. The ultimate goal is to get to about 12. And when we shift funding in the fiscal year 26, 27 and beyond, we should be able to accomplish more paving because we're not investing in as much in the curbing on these roadways. Okay, next project, page 3-6 is our traffic system management. This is also a recurring program. This is to handle all things related to traffic systems. So it could be a traffic signal, it could be traffic signs, pavement markings, guide rail, etc. This program did not have a requested change, although it was reduced slightly due to a cut in our capital non-recurring expenditures of about $51,000. So we should still be able to accomplish pretty much what we need to with regards to traffic system management, despite that cut, which will affect our pavement markings. The next program on page 3-7 is flood mitigation infrastructure improvements. This is a recurring but a fairly new program. Fiscal year 25 is the second year of this program. The previous year, there was $2 million allocated. This year, fiscal year 25 and beyond in the CIP, it was increased to $5 million a year. Again, this is separate from stormwater management. So now we're looking at areas of town that have flood recurrences and how do we address that? We've done a lot of drainage studies, a lot of recommendations came from those, and now we're starting to get into the construction phase for these. The first one will be later this year, looking to replace 2 drainage culverts and vastly increase their size to convey more floodwaters to reduce the impacts to the streets and surrounding neighborhoods. We have other projects planned in the latter years. We'll see how those unfold. The 2 culverts that I mentioned are located on Troutbrook Drive near Asylum Avenue. So they're close to the former UConn campus. That's a flood-prone area. The replacement of those culverts will reduce the flooding impacts to the adjacent properties. It will eliminate flooding of the streets. These projects are very expensive. They take a long time to get done, but they are very rewarding when you need them the most. The next capital improvement program is on page 3-8, which is infrastructure improvement program. This is fairly new as well. It is also recurring. It's $200,000 per year. This was something that I wanted to add to our CIP because there's projects that kind of fall into this gray area, meaning who's ultimately responsible, who has jurisdiction over the project. Perfect example of this is our Webster Walk area in Blueback Square. It is in need of attention. It is deteriorating, but there was a little bit of finger pointing. Is it a sidewalk? Well, it's not along a public street. It's on a town property. So engineering typically wouldn't get involved. There are retaining walls. There's an elevator. Is it a public works facility? Is it a plant and facilities project. So there was some confusion and still the project needed to get done. There are other similar projects throughout town, so we wanted to create the infrastructure improvement program to address these. So it is recurring. Fiscal year 25 is the first year it's introduced, and we are focusing on that Webster Walk area as the first project. So going forward, there are no requested changes to this capital improvement program as far as funding goes. Also, one other thing to point out about this CIP, the way that it would work, because there's multiple directors that have projects in mind, they will go to the town manager and plead their case, if you will, and the town manager has the ultimate decision as to what to spend this money on. Next one is the Fern Street Bridge replacement. This is on page 3-9 of the capital improvement program booklet.
Oh, excuse me.
Madam Chair.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was looking at waving. I have a question on that through you, Chair. So on Webster Walk, I do notice the new stairs were very good and the water fountain. But tell us a little bit more about that confusion. So what's unclear in terms of like the retaining wall? That's not a blue back thing, or I'm confused as to why there's confusion, like as to who's supposed to be maintaining that.
Sure, I'll explain. It's not confusion in the sense of, is it a private infrastructure that needs to be maintained or is it public? It is definitely public. There are documents that clearly identify who's responsible for what. So that's not the confusion. The confusion is the elements that are within Webster Walk are handled by multiple groups. So for example, there's a retaining wall. Well, plant facilities doesn't typically get involved in retaining walls. That's usually public works or engineering. Stairs is usually facilities, sometimes public works, but usually facilities. And then Webster Walk area actually spreads into a public street right away. So when you start to work on the walking surfaces, it kind of depends on where you are. Is it more of the property or is it in the public street right away? And there's both. So if you're going to do resurfacing of the area, now you're spreading across sort of a jurisdiction, if you will. So the confusion was, well, who's ultimately responsible for designing and inspecting and handling the funding for that project? So ultimately, that particular project is being spearheaded by plant facilities. This CIP gives them a funding mechanism to carry forward, for which they may not have budgeted. Another example would be our Chopper Trail. So engineering did the design, we oversaw the construction, but it's not along a public street right away for the most part. It's essentially a linear park. So you think leisure services, well, leisure services doesn't have a funding mechanism to maintain this. So it's kind of falling on public works, but when you talk about 3.8 miles of a new trail, that's a lot. So we just need to program and be prepared for that. There was an argument to be made about the Memorial and Isham garages. You know, is that a parking facility or is it a structure, a building? So we just need to get out in front of these discussions and make sure that we're prepared for them.
Okay, thank you. I understand.
Okay, I believe I was going to the Fern Street Bridge replacement project. So on page 3-9. So not to be confused there, we have a couple Fern Street bridges. So this is the one next to Fern Ridge Park. And we, back in 2018, it's been a long time, received a grant through CROG to replace this bridge. It was a $3 million grant. We don't get grants to replace bridges very often, so that was great. We entered into the design phase. We did utility interaction and coordination. We worked with property owners to get easements. We worked to get permits. So there was a lot of work that went on. We got into the final design stage. We met again with the NDC, and the NDC said, oh, hang on, you need to replace the water main that's under the bridge. So the project stalled while we worked on this matter with the NDC. There was also a funding shortage because of that. We had to go back to CROG. Luckily, they were willing to supplement the grant with another $3 million. So it's been out there for a while in need of attention. You may have seen the concrete barriers going across the bridge, very frustrating, especially for the abutting property owners. We're planning on replacing the bridge starting this year. Funding is in place, the design is nearly done. Luckily, we didn't have to go back and redo the permitting. So happy to report that, but we did need to update the CIP. So there was an increase requested in order to fund that. Even though we did get an additional funding allocation from CROG, there's still a required town match. So you'll see that in there. Hopefully the bids are favorable later on. We're hoping to be bidding the project in the summer and start the construction in the fall. And the next one is on 3-10, which is our Trumper Trail Phase 3. I mentioned this earlier. So this is the section from Park Road down to Jackson Avenue. So this is a standalone, non-recurring project to get us to fill that trail gap, if you will. So there's 900,000 that is planned to use by bond and 500,000 for a grant. I'm told by our engineering division that we have enough funding between those two sources to build this trail section this year, which is very exciting. Happy to see that come to fruition. Hopefully we have a ribbon cutting for that section. So no requested changes for that one. The next one on 3-11 is our Farmington Avenue reconstruction project in the center. So this is related to the West Hartford Center Infrastructure Master Plan that we are working on. Also, the next one on 312 LaSalle Road is tied into that, although they're separate CIPs. But this would be the same construction project starting later on. Actually, starting early next year. As we worked our way through the design, did outreach, the design got more complicated and the cost went up. So for Farmington Avenue, we did request an increase of about 3.9 million using ARPA funds to supplement the amount that was already secured. And similarly for LaSalle Road, we requested an increase of 1.9 million for ARPA funds. So those funds will be put to use very soon for these reconstruction projects. The elements of the projects, by the way, we have another public meeting on this on April 8th. So we're going to unveil the selected concept plan for Farmington and LaSalle's reconstructions. But the goal for these projects is to replace all of the infrastructure that you see. So that would be the sidewalk surfaces, the pavement, the street lighting, the trees, improve the area by introducing traffic calming, reduce crosswalk distances, enhance the parking as best we can, and slow traffic down. We're trying to make it a more inviting area, also focused on expanding the sidewalks, but doing so in a manner in which we're not sacrificing parking. We want to make sure that we're working as best we can on all the needs for the area. We have very popular outdoor dining and we want to keep it. We want to expand it if we can. We're trying to get it off of the road, out of the parking areas, keep it on the sidewalk as best we can. So you'll hear more about that very soon. Again, April 8th is the next public meeting, but these are the funds that we need in order to construct those projects. So going to page 3-13, the last CIP that I will mention, which is brand new, it's Vision Zero. So this is the funding mechanism to address all of the safety needs that came out of our Vision Zero action plan. We are chasing grants, have been successful with Safe Streets and Roads for All. We'll continue to try where we can to obtain additional grants, but we did need additional funding in order to get the ball rolling on these improvements. So year one is a $500,000 allocation using ARPA funds. Year two is also a $500,000 obligation using ARPA funds. So I met with engineering staff yesterday to coordinate this effort. We have a lot of work to do in a short period of time to be able to tie up these ARPA funds, but we are up to the challenge and we're going to do everything that we can to get those projects underway. Also worth noting that in FY26, this Vision Zero program has an increase in funding of $1 million, but it's not ARPA funds. So there is a big investment by the town. Thank you to the town council to focus on safety coming out of our Vision Zero initiative. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Do any of the committee members have questions? Council members, Councilor Blanks, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I didn't want to go before the committee members, but first off, Dwayne, I just have to say thank you, thank you, thank you. The residents of St. Augustine will be jumping for joy when they see the equipment pulling up. So thank you. We've been waiting a long time. I just have a quick question on, let me see, going back to the flood mitigation infrastructure improvements, where you stated that these projects are expensive and take a long time. Can you just elaborate on that for the listening audience and also for my own knowledge base? I have an idea, but I'd just like you to walk me through it briefly, and for others as well. Thank you.
Absolutely, happy to do so. In addressing the flooding issues that we have in town, and from the studies that we've completed, we've identified that our storm drainage system is just not capable of handling these intense rain events that are frequently occurring. And what that means is we need to increase the size of it. And there's challenges in doing that. There's a lot of utilities under the ground that you have to thread the needle, if you will, to get the pipes to fit. And we rely on gravity flow, so you're not pumping. So that pipe has a set path and you can't really change it much. So it's just finding that path underground. So it requires a lot of survey, utility coordination to figure that out. That's the time investment. Also related to that, for each and every one of these projects, it involves a water course. You have to get the water from the drainage system to the water course. Even if it already has a pipe going to the water course, if we're touching it, expanding it, the permitting gets very involved, and that takes time. So that's the time component. Anytime you're excavating, and sometimes it requires us to relocate utilities, it gets pretty expensive. The material itself and the labor involved to get it installed is expensive. But in the end, you're removing dozens of properties from a flood zone. Our culvert projects, we have one more to do in that same area of the former Yukon campus. But when we get those 3 completed, we're going to remove over 20 properties from a flood zone, eliminate their need to have flood insurance. So it's worth the expense, in my opinion. There are other areas of town where we have repetitive street flooding, and when that happens, people can't get to and from their houses. Emergency vehicles have to set up detour, or Public Works has to set up detours, which makes emergency vehicles go in many different directions. So it's time consuming, it's expensive, but it's worthwhile.
Thank you. No further questions, Madam Chair. You're on mute, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Carol. No more questions? Okay, I'd just like to say thank you for your presentation. It was thorough, it was quick, all the things that we like in these meetings. So thank you so much. And last call for questions for Dwayne. Okay, thank you so much. Rick, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dwayne and finance team. That was excellent. So we wanted to, at this point, move on to a discussion on cannabis. So we have uploaded a draft of an ordinance around around regulations for cannabis establishments. As the council may recall, we did the original ordinance provided temporary zoning regulations for cannabis establishments. And those are set to expire on June 30th of 2024. And so far, we've had about 2 years of experience with the current ordinance. And in this time, we have, as folks know, we've had 2 establishments open. The first was Budar, which opened last July, and the second was Sweet Spot, which opened last month. Both have been welcome members of our small business community. But as we're getting closer to the June 30th deadline, we've had the opportunity to review our current ordinance and have some suggested changes for the council to consider that would potentially expand the number of establishments in town from a maximum of 2. If you remember, we set it up originally with 2, but we're suggesting we move it to 3. But at the same time, create a 5,000-foot buffer between the current establishments and then a third should the council approve that type of change. In addition, we looked at the measurement of the future establishment in parks and libraries, public buildings, et cetera. So what we are proposing is changing that language to align that language with what is in our current liquor ordinances as well. And then we took a look at the districts where we would potentially approve a third zoning districts where we would potentially approve a third establishment. And this one is for consideration as well. So what we have noticed over the last 2 years, and we don't have any establishments obviously in the center or Blueback Square. But since marijuana has been legalized, we've received calls. Folks have noticed the smell of marijuana in certain areas. Sometimes that'll occur in the center. It's as we know, very densely populated on nights and weekends, and we can have thousands walking through the center in Blueback Square. Some folks think, have tied it to the smoke shops, and, we have had a couple of legal issues with some of our smoke shops. So folks have had a tendency to try to tie that to that. So we, just for consideration purposes, thought to potentially amend the zoning districts that would apply as well. So at this point, I'll pause there. And our Corporation Counsel, Mr. Dodge, has been working with Mr. Dumais, our town planner, on this as well. So I'll pause there, and through you, Madam Chair, turn it over to our Corporation Counsel for any comments that he'd like to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Madam Chair, this is Dallas Dodge, Corporation Counsel. And Rick did a very nice job summarizing the ordinance that we've drafted for you. And so I don't think that there's too much for me to add. The only other color that I would provide is in terms of West Hartford Center. One reason why we're restricting the zoning there is because under the previous iteration of the ordinance, where we were restricting cannabis retail establishments from going within 500 feet of certain sites. When we previously measured that sort of as the crow flies from lot line to lot line, Town Hall and the library knocked out the majority of West Hartford Center. So now with the new calculation, those areas would no longer be knocked out by those special sites that are located there, which is why we've made it a little bit more restrictive in terms of the zones where you could engage in the retail sale of cannabis. Just to describe the difference in the calculations, and as the manager said, we're making this now consistent with how we measure distances for liquor establishments. Under the previous ordinance, the measurement was from lot line to lot line, which could knock out sort of wide swaths of area that might have been appropriate or desirable for cannabis retail sales. This makes the measurement more consistent with our liquor ordinance, which means that you would now measure the distance by going from the main entrance of the area of the building that is being used for cannabis retail sales out to the street at the address where the establishment is located, and then down the center line of the street to the location of whatever special site you're trying to analyze, whether the retail establishment is close to. So that's how that calculation changes under the new iteration of the ordinance. I'm happy. I don't know if the town planner has anything that he'd like to add. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is Todd still here?
I am here, Madam Chair.
Oh.
I don't have anything to add. I do have a map that could also provide a little bit of graphical explanation between the distance between two establishments. That's a new element, so we have that to share. If anyone in the council would like to see that.
Yes, I think they would like to see it. Thank you.
So can you see the map right now?
Yes. Can you zoom in?
I will zoom in, yes.
Okay, thank you.
This is a map that we used when we developed the original cannabis ordinance in bright green. Zooming in right now on Bishop's Corner, for example. In bright green were eligible commercial locations based on the existing ordinance as proposed with those sensitive land use buffers, again, calculated as the crow flies. The purpose of this map is to show the two existing locations that we have in town, and they are, almost next door to each other in terms of land uses. That's because we did not develop a distance separation requirement between two establishments when the original ordinance was adopted. And Corporation Counsel Dodge, in aligning this ordinance with our liquor control, we're also imposing a separation between two establishments, much like we have in the liquor control ordinances. So this green boundary you see in hatch from these two red circles, that's that 5,000 foot boundary. And the purpose for creating a boundary of that size is to ensure we don't have an undue concentration of establishments, basically only in Park Road or on Prospect Avenue. And as you can see here, all of the green properties along this spine are on Park Road, and without a 5,000 foot buffer, concentration would stay over there. So that's how that buffer element comes into play for distances between existing establishments.
Are there any questions? I can't see everyone, so if you have a question, just go ahead and.
Yeah, good morning. This is Mary, Madam Chair, through you. I'm just wondering, what's our vision? What's our long-term vision of where we want to be in the marijuana industry? There's a wide spectrum around Greater Hartford of towns that have absolutely said no, so they're not allowing any in. And then there's others that welcome the business and, have more probably than others per capita or however we want to measure it. What's our long-term plan though? I mean, do we want to be a leader here? Do we want to be conservative and think about how many we want? I don't think we've ever really discussed that. So I would like people's view on that, because I think we sort of, it would be helpful in our communication with constituents to kind of know where we're going with this. And I don't know that necessarily it's a numbers that we want 20 or 30, but some sort of plan of whether we want to be a leader, moderate, or follower or whatever. I'm not sure what we're thinking with this. Thank you.
This is Mayor Cantor through you, Madam Chair. I'll say, Mary, look, this particular, it's a new industry for the town. I think we want to thread the needle. We want to offer, well, obviously we've decided already that we are opening up, cannabis for retail. Some towns like Bloomfield have done it for cultivation and not for retail. There are other towns that have said no, as you said, other towns that have accepted and not had limits. When the state was originally discussing this, they had said 25,000, and they had done a lot of research. 25,000 for each cannabis retail was a good benchmark. At the very end of it, they took that off. We had talked about it in terms of 2, but in then looking at the state's information and data, it looked as though each 25,000, so you would have 1 from 0 to 25,000, 2 from 25 to 50,000, and 3 from 50 to 75,000, which is where we fall. So that's kind of where we are feeling that that's appropriate, that 3 is the right place to be. And then observe it and see, 2, 3, 4 years. And if there's another establishment that wants to come in, we say yes, or we say no, we're not changing the zoning, or we feel that at that point, I don't think we can say, we're capping it at 3 forever, or we don't want any more than 2, that I don't know forever. But right now, I think that the feeling from discussions is that the 3 was sort of, that's where we felt we probably should be anyway, to meet our community's needs and surrounding communities that might not have that availability. And that is both. We have one establishment is purely recreational. The other establishment is a medical and recreational. They have a big medical component to it. So, and we did a moratorium on that. So anyway, so that's my piece on that.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Cortez.
For you, Madam Chair. So, with regards to the whole cannabis retail thing, I think we managed to do something that other towns, neighboring towns, weren't able to do. So I'm going to give credit where credit is due, and I think we did that right. Where we went wrong was with the distance, and I thought that was there was something in place the first time around, but obviously there wasn't, and we ended up with 2 retail spaces right next to each other, which in the wrong, where I didn't want to see it happen. I questioned, that the first time around, that is this going to happen? We're going to have one on every corner in certain neighborhoods. So, the 5,000 feet will right a wrong, I guess. But then we talk about benefits to our community, and the benefit is they have 2 options right now. Just they happen to be right close to each other. And I think that's our duty, it's benefits to our community. Who wins with this is, adding a 3rd would be cannabis retailers win, right? We might win as far as, gaining a little bit more revenue on it for now, because if the state gets involved and take more money down the road, and we tend to lose that revenue, I really don't see a benefit of a 3rd one. I mean, there is really not that demand. I mean, when you go there, that's one of the things I was talking about the other day. I'm glad that there's not lines on the door. It's not overwhelming. It's not something where I see, I don't understand why, a 3rd one, who would benefit out of a 3rd one? And when we're talking about, increasing complaints, smells of, cannabis smells in the center. So we're just going to add a 3rd one, another option, to again, to increase more complaints. So the community is saying, hey, we're concerned about the smells, but in our answer is, we're going to add a 3rd one, but it's going to bring us a little bit more money. I don't know if the benefits, outweigh the cons in this situation. Again, I think what we could have done better last time was do that 5,000 foot buffer, so they weren't right neighboring to each other. I disagree that, there'll be a benefit to a 3rd one right now. I just don't see it. We just had the 2nd one pop up. It's still in the infancy stages. I would like to see this kind of through a little bit longer. But obviously put something, I know there's a temporary piece and just make what we got right now official. Thank you.
Counselor Walters.
Hi, thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. I hear what Alberto is saying, Councilor Cortez is saying. I think that there's two other things that are going to affect, how many we have, whether a third one even is established, and that's plain and simple market forces, good old capitalism. They're not going to build it if they're not going to make any money, plain and simple. And the other thing is right now, supply. We're hearing that existing establishments are unable to stock what they need to meet their current sales. So again, capitalism at work. So I think opening it up to a third one is fine. I think that we rely on the market forces to determine what happens where and when. And then we go from there. And certainly we can't ignore the revenue. Councilor Cortez mentioned the benefits to the town. That revenue is nothing to slack off of. It is a nice little chunk of money that does benefit our town, and some of the programs that we are able to offer. So that's my initial thoughts on this.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? I was just going to say that I agree with Councilor Walters on this. If it's not beneficial for someone to put another business in, then they're not going to. And I do, in fact, have a very close friend who had a relative that recently passed away from cancer, and he had trouble getting the things they needed in West Hartford because the supply was low. And he actually had to go to Massachusetts to get what she needed in her last days. So we're not putting a third one in, we're allowing a third one to come in if it needs to be. We've set the boundaries, and we've lined it up with establishments with liquor stores, which is fair. So that's how I feel about the ordinance. Representative Councilor Cortez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just two things. When we first had the cannabis discussion that night, right? I never forget that night. But I was told that night no one would want to bring cannabis retail to West Hartford. It's just so we have something in place, and we maxed out. So there will be a third one in West Hartford if we allow it. There would be a third. Now my question is, I know for the retail spaces where we're doing the cap, and I understand the medical need for this stuff. If I'm not mistaken, if we did a medical dispensary, there is no cap on that, correct? I mean, so if there is that medical need, we would allow. And I'm not sure. I just want clarification on that. But I thought that dispensary was different than a retail, and there is no cap on that.
I don't know on that, but a lot of people do not get medical license anymore since recreation is available, and it's a whole process to go through getting a medical license. I think a majority of the council is new since this vote took place, so you have to forgive because I wasn't there. Counselor Walters, and I don't think Counselor Poland was there. Oh, was there as well. Todd, did you have your hand up?
Yes, Madam Chair, through you, to Councilor Cortez. The existing ordinance and the proposed changes define cannabis retail establishments to include retailers or dispensaries or hybrid facilities. So the cap right now would apply at 2. If this ordinance advanced and passed, it would apply at 3, regardless of that type. So if it was a pure dispensary coming in, that would be count against the cap. I think if that answers your question.
No, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Winograd, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. No, I just wanted to add, I mean, to respond to Councilor Cortez, I mean, I don't think, I don't recall any discussion that it wouldn't be built. I think we did assume it would be built, but also by, based on market demands. So again, and this whole discussion, I will say, we're putting limitations because it's a new industry, because we want to make sure, residents are protected, and neighborhoods are protected from perhaps unforeseen complications from having cannabis stores. But ultimately, we're not and shouldn't be in the business of over-regulating a legal establishment. And the business decisions as to whether or not someone decides to build or how much they invest in our town really should be driven, capitalism, right? I mean, it's the market. And I think we should restrict the market, sort of as little as possible. Certainly times when we should do so. And I think, this strikes a proper balance. And if it changes over time, it changes over time. But some of the concerns, I mean, there may not be enough supply and they may not be able to be a viable business. Again, I think that's up to the people who are putting up the money for a business and more their concern than ours. But I will say, I mean, in terms of when we are limiting, our residents' ability to get to an establishment they want to get to. So, the current stores are pretty far from other parts of town. So to the extent that, we like to have supermarkets near us, we like to have liquor stores on pretty much every corner. The other thing, businesses that are closer, having them all sort of right on our border, it's sort of not an ideal situation for any business where people want to get to. So I do think, we do want to avoid having 3, on a block. I think when we originally passed it, when we realized we were only going to have 2 in town, except the thought that it wasn't as big a deal if 2 happened to be near each other. And I tend to agree. I wish they were farther apart, but I think that when it was only 2, it was less important to avoid the clustering. Now with a 3rd, and we definitely want to avoid that. And I think that's why the 5,000 foot is appropriate.
Councilor Cortez.
One thing that kind of comes up a little bit is just how we are with liquor stores, right? So I grew up in the inner city, and now it's accessible. Underage drinking in our inner city is a big thing, just because liquor is legally accessible. People are not making it at homes. Right now, we have a huge issue with wrong-way drivers on the highway. So why are we going to add something? Again, I grew up in an environment where all this stuff was accessible legally, but it was being used illegally. When you have bootleggers come involved and things of that nature. In our schools right now, there's cannabis use in the schools by the students. We don't talk about it, but this stuff happens in the bathroom. I have a child who's in high school. It's been going on since middle school. So there's a problem. So when you make it more accessible, again, what direction are we trying to go? So yes, it is a legal establishment. I understand you don't really want to restrict the business, but there's consequences. And when we compare it to alcohol, we have consequences with the alcohol, especially with the wrong way drivers. It's a huge problem in the state. So why throw something else in the mix, especially when, at some point in this meeting, we talk about the complaints of the cannabis smell. And when we talk about driving under the influence, cannabis is playing a role, as well as, you know, the driving under the influence right now, you know, so we've had a spike and this adds to it. So again, I like the fact that, you know, we did something that other towns can't do. I think we got it right. What we got wrong was the distance. We got two, you know, and you know, is a great option for people, you know. As far as the supply piece, there's supply issues with everything right now. You know, sometimes you go to the supermarket and your favorite toilet paper is not there. You know, so I think that the supply piece is something that we're seeing across the board, not just with the cannabis. We can go to other communities and find it. And yes, why get that medical card, you know, when it's easier just to go to the retail piece, you know, for the, so I do understand the benefits. I know people that take advantage of the benefits and it has helped them physically. My mother has, you know, like serious health issues, and cannabis played an important role for her in New Jersey. But I just think that when we compare it to another legal business, you know, that's been a problem in the state, you know, as far as the alcohol sales. So I think this is going to be just that one more thing. We got two. Again, we did something that other communities couldn't do. And I think that's great. I don't see the need for the three. I think the supply issue is something that is just not, it's not just for cannabis, it's for, you know, it's on everything. So, and hopefully with Bloomfield doing the agricultural piece, that would, you know, help with the supply piece down the road. But I think that's it on the cannabis for me. But thank you guys for listening.
Councilor Blanks.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I don't have so much of a question, but a comment. I am open to the additional 5,000 feet from an establishment already in town, especially the two that we just talked about at length. And I want to say I'm kind of looking at this a little different, because for that person who needs it and is unable to access because of proximity, this would open or provide an option for that person or families or what have you. And I do think that we as a council need to be open for business owners who want to come to West Hartford and who do want to open up an establishment and provide needed service to those who are looking to have an option to make their life in terms of what their condition is a little easier. So from that vantage point, I would be open to entertaining that. And I understand all the comments that have been said. And I too grew up in an urban environment, and there is much more to, you know, who's gonna smoke marijuana or who's gonna drink liquor underage. And I think that's always going to be the case. And I think much more has to go into that, whether there is parental guidance, supervision in schools and other places as well. But I think if we do this right, and we have done so thus far, I think it's something that we can manage. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'll just say one more thing before I move on to back to our town manager. The discussion about legal and illegal use, I think that's two different discussions completely. Because I didn't grow up in a city. I grew up in a rural town, and you know, I don't even know that we had a liquor store, but people still had alcohol. So illegal use and legal use are two completely different discussions. In my opinion, I do understand what you're saying and where you're coming from. This is something that's legal, and it is something that's becoming legal around the country. And it, you know, they do have things in place to keep people from getting into dispensaries. Much more difficult than walking into a liquor store, or in the state I grew up in, walking into the gas station market and getting alcohol. But I'll turn this over to Rick for next steps. But thanks to everyone for their comments and opinions on this ordinance?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone for that conversation. So as I opened up originally, we do have that June 30th of 2024 deadline that we are adhering to at this point. And to Councilor Cortez's comments, remembering the conversation that took place on May 24th of 2022, I remember it very well that night as well, and feel somewhat partially responsible for the misinterpretation of the state. As the mayor in her comments had stated, we had gone with the 1 per 25,000, but our interpretation was that it was going towards the 50,000 versus the 75,000. So it was 1 per 25,000. We thought it was a maximum of 2. It actually was a maximum of 3 under the current, at that time, the current state statute, which happened to be lifted by the governor the very same night that we were voting as well. So what this amendment would do would be to essentially put us to probably where the council, not to put words or a vote into anyone's thought, but probably where we would have ended up on that evening as well, going to 3. And with the 5,000 foot buffer, it does put the opportunity for another establishment in a much different part of town from where it is today. So if it's what we would do at this point would be to put this ordinance on the council agenda, and then we would set it for a future date I believe we'll have to, because it's an amendment to the ordinance, Corporation Council Dodge, we would have to set a public hearing at that point as well, correct?
Yes, Mr. Manager, because it's a zoning ordinance, all the rules in terms of reading in and saying for public hearing would apply. So we would have to have a public hearing no less than 30 days, no more than 60 days after the ordinance was read in.
Thank you.
And some of the reason for moving quickly with this is we obviously need to back into making sure that we have an effective date that goes into effect prior to that June 30th sunset for the current density cap that is in ordinance.
Thank you. So through you, Madam Chair, that would be our next steps to move this forward to meet our timeline. Thank you.
Okay, are we moving on to the modifications to the parking?
Yeah, thank you. And this will take just 5 minutes. I appreciate everyone's time this morning. I know we've, over the last 2 days, taken up a lot of time on a number of different issues. And we do have 2 proposed changes to on-street parking that we will propose at our next special services district. So we don't, as you know, we meet very infrequently with the SSD and wanted an opportunity to get these 2 items onto the next agenda. So we wanted to briefly update CPED on these changes, but they would formally go before the special services district in the future. So first has to do with parking directly in front of the Rutherford building at 65 Memorial Road. We've been working with Brand Street Properties, the owner of Blueback Square, for well over a year on this request. And what they have proposed would be the removal of 2 parallel parking spots directly in front of the Rutherford door on Memorial, and converting those 2 drop-off spots or parking spots, parallel spots, into a drop-off area. And as we all know, the Rutherford building has a large number of healthcare tenants in the building. And this drop-off area would allow patients, particularly those with mobility issues, may require a walker or a wheelchair, the ability to be dropped off right in front of the Rutherford building and allow those patients to move safely into the building without having to navigate the parking garage or even non-street parking, getting in between cars and things like that. So this has been a very important initiative to Brand Street. As I said, that we've been working with them for well over a year now. So should the Special Services District approve this change, Brand Street Properties would fund the proposed modifications. And then the second change would be converting 2 parking spots on Isham Road at the north end of the Isham garage. So if you go down Isham and kind of bear right around the corner going towards Raymond, we would convert 2 parallel parking spots there and would convert them into 15 minutes. So short-term parking, 15 minutes or less, which would allow customers or delivery personnel to access. We have Mariucci, Japanese food and deli. We have the Birdie Lounge right there as well. There's very limited parking on Raymond Road, right in front of those establishments, as well as Dinah Road. So this would give the opportunity for folks to come in quickly, park for less than 15 minutes, get into both of those establishments and move on. So this would be helping to small businesses as well. And again, it's 2 spots right on the north end of the garage there. So these would come before the Special Services District, potentially in April, but wanted to just make CPED aware of those 2 changes. And through you, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions that the council had.
Does anyone have any questions on these 2 things? Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions.
Very good. Thank you.
So we've got, there's no staff reports today. Does anyone have any future agenda items? Okay, well, thank you guys for, I think the meeting was scheduled for an hour and a half, so we're actually getting done early. Thank you for joining this meeting. Thank you for the people who gave presentations, and I think I'll probably see a few of you in a few hours at Town Hall. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.